welcome. And I want to introduce Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, who recently wrote the book Kosher, Jesus, which is obviously why you guys are here tonight. He is based out of the East Coast right now, and he's the founder of the organization This World of Values Network, and has authored somewhere around 26 books. There's a lot, so I lose count. Did someone say something 27? Okay.
It's okay, some have sold 27, so be that impressed.
And this is Rabbi Yonah Bookstein, who runs JConnect LA, which is a Jewish nonprofit in Los Angeles that also does Jewish outreach and nonprofit events for people that are young professionals. So welcome to both of you. And
thank you for coming. This was a very hastily put together discussion about the book. And so we appreciate you coming out on such short notice. I think that you'll find, oh yeah, we're having a new note. I hope you'll find tonight's discussion interesting. It's not going to be a whole Megillah. We're going to get to some topics. There'll be plenty of opportunity for participation. I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Thank Nessa Synagogue, Simon and the staff and rabbis at Nessa for hosting us. And thank Shmuley, my old friend from Oxford, who had to be in Los Angeles for other reasons, and we took this opportunity so we could discuss this in public. There will be a chance for everyone to have questions, and first I'm going to start off with asking Shmuley a couple of things. Please turn off your cell phones. Keep your questions to questions, and let's try to be polite to the rabbi. Okay? We got the ground rules down? All right, awesome. Thank you very much. I have to say, Shmuley, when I first saw the title of your book come out, I said, now you've really outdone yourself. First there was kosher sex, then there was kosher adultery, then there's kosher sutra. And I wondered how we could notch it up a level. I didn't think it was possible. And then came kosher Jesus. And honestly, when I first heard about it, I was a little bit concerned. What happened to my friend, the rabbi, as he switched camps on me?
They made me a better offer.
This is what I was afraid of. But on further investigation, which I felt I had to do, and I actually see there's a lot here to talk about. And most people have not had a chance to read the book. Most people haven't, because officially the book's not published yet. Or not launched yet, right?
Correct.
And I'm guessing that some of you might have heard a little bit about the controversy behind what's going on. And in fact, according to one rabbi, it's completely illegal for me to be sitting here talking about it, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't think you're mistaken. That seems to be correct. I'm not sure all of you are allowed to listen to this either. So please put your cell phones on.
Even the name Jesus in Jewish circles, or here in a temple, can ruffle a few feathers. But after reading the book, I have to tell you that this book should be angering Christians, I think, more than Jews. This has done a great job of bringing together historical criticism, which has been done over a long period of time, and surely you've managed to put it together in a beautiful package. You've given us something to think about. But I have a few questions for you. And I know you have a lot to say. Shmuley, tell me, what are you hoping to achieve with this book?
I hope we can sell it. This rabbi at Bandit, he only said that you're not allowed to read it. He did not say you're not allowed to buy it. So I give you official permission to buy it without reading it, which is what most people do with the books they buy anyway. Rabbi Yonah Bookstein, it's a pleasure to share podium with you once again. Yonah and I were colleagues when I was the rabbi at Oxford University. He began as a student, ended up as an assistant rabbi to me, and now he has achieved national fame as one of the young, dynamic, and very forward-looking Orthodox rabbis in the United States, who's doing an outstanding job bringing tens of thousands of young Jews together. So it's very nice to be back with you. And we did organize this on very short notice. And one of the reasons was Yonah and I began to speak about the fact that I was going to be here in Los Angeles with my family, given that my father wasn't feeling all that spent time with him. And when Kosher Jesus started being attacked, leading to a veritable war in the blogosphere, in pre-publication, the book could not defend itself, and so I have been on the defensive for it, writing numerous essays defending against attack. Needless to say that anyone who bans a book without giving any reason, I don't believe that's particularly Jewish, I don't believe that's decent. I would even say it's Khomeini-esque, and it's something that I reject utterly. So I'm happy that we're here to talk about the book. What do I hope to achieve? 3 things. First and foremost, for 2,000 years, Christianity was the mortal enemy of Jews and Judaism. Mortal enemy of Jews because it was the repository of anti-Semitism, including Christian scripture. But even the mortal enemy of Judaism because Christianity claimed replacement theology. It claimed to have replaced Judaism as the only authentic faith. And Christians were the new children of Abraham. As St. Paul said, they were grafted onto the seed of Abraham. So they replaced the Jewish people as well. Well, this led to animosity, the likes of which manifested itself in things like pogroms and on-the-face and expulsions. And I'm not the first person to say that Christian anti-Judaism slowly transmuted itself into racial anti-Semitism, leading ultimately to the Holocaust. So these are very serious things indeed, especially the charge of deicide. In the history of the world, no nation has ever been accused of snuffing out the source of light and life. For any nation to be capable of killing God would have to mean that they are possessed of such demonic power. They are possessed of such satanic energy that they're able to even kill God. I mean, just think about what the charge means. And the vast majority of the world believe this about us up until modern times. For those of you who think that this is not something that's really spoken about, you probably saw a story recently with Fox News. The Latino edition of Fox News asked a question about a month ago. Who killed Jesus Christ? There were 3 choices, and one of them was the Jews. But we don't have to go to Fox News in the Latino edition. One of Hollywood's biggest stars made $500 million making a movie that essentially portrayed the Jews as agitating for the death of Jesus, demanding the death of Jesus, and ultimately bringing about the death of Jesus. And that was just 5 years ago. So the first thing I want to do, Yona, is now that all of that has changed, 2,000 years of Christian animosity towards Jews and Judaism has now stopped. It stopped beginning with Vatican II, when Pope John XXIII relieved the Jews of the charge of deicide. Then there was the pontificate of Paul VI, which was more neutral to Jews, but the pontificate of John Paul II, and now Benedict XVI, couldn't be more friendly to Jews. I had the great pleasure of meeting this Pope. This Pope is very warm to Jewish clerics. He's a great lover of the Jewish people. John Paul II called the Jewish people the elder spiritual brothers of Christians. Let alone the evangelical Christian support for Israel, which is stalwart, predictable, and in many ways more reliable than even American Jewish support for the state of Israel. So my first objective is to create a theological bridge so that this new era of rapprochement will have a theological foundation. You can't have a friendship where Jews and Christians come together for all these important conferences to support Israel, but there's this 600-pound gorilla in the room, the mention of the name of Jesus, which creates such discomfort on the part of both communities, because the Christians don't want to be seen as ramming Jesus down Jewish throats. The Jews don't want to be seen as being stooges for covert Christian missionary efforts. You can't not talk about this. In this new age of Jewish-Christian friendship, the issue of Jesus the Jew can no longer be ignored. That's the most important aspect of the book. Secondly, there is a need for Christians to discover the Jewishness of Jesus, because without the Jewishness of Jesus, you don't have the humanity of Jesus. Evangelical Christianity is one of the great forces for good in the United States today. Not only does it lead to great support for Israel, but evangelicals believe in values, they believe in strong families, they canvass, lobby, and agitate for strong families. On the other hand, evangelical Christianity is also very politically polarizing. Evangelical Christianity is leading to an us and them kind of mentality, where we look at gays or women who want to have abortions as the 2 values that are eroding the moral fabric of America. I don't believe in this divisiveness. I think that if we focus less on the divinity and perfection of Jesus, rendering Christianity less judgmental, and focus more on the humanity of Jesus, then Christianity would be more of a blessing. I think that it would be less polarizing.
You're trying to reform Christianity and Judaism.
I don't have to reform Judaism. I don't get into that.
Reform attitudes towards Jesus.
The Council of Nicaea, that was convened by Constantine the Great, decided, and it became Christian doctrine till this day, that Jesus is both fully divine and fully human. Now, obviously, the Jews reject the fully divine part. But the question is, why do the Christians not embrace the fully human part? Where do we discover the humanity of Jesus? Where do we see the struggles of Jesus? And the more you have a divine figure who is perfect, whom you worship, the more you judge other people by a standard of perfection. Notice that the word Israel means he who struggles with God. But Christians believe in someone who does not struggle, he's perfect. So this book also focuses on the Jewishness of Jesus to portray someone who really did struggle. That was the second thing. And finally, the third, sort of this longer response. And the third objective is Jews need to be educated about the Jewishness of Jesus for two very important reasons. Number one, you ought to know how much light Judaism has brought to the rest of the world. One of the reasons that young Jews are not interested in their tradition sufficiently is that they don't see that Judaism has been impactful. They look at Christianity and Islam, in this book I demonstrate that everything Jesus taught, I trace it back to its original Jewish source. And secondly, if Jews are not aware of Christianity and the texts of the New Testament and the texts of the Torah that are used by missionaries to missionize us, then we can't engage in this relationship with Christians for fear that they will prey on us like sitting ducks. We have to be more knowledgeable, and that leads to a more authentic and more productive friendship with Christians.
You're not the first Orthodox Jew to tackle this issue. You're the first Orthodox Jew to tackle it recently. Did a little research. In the 13th century, there was a Kosher. Thankfully, I have a friend here, a scholar, helped me out. He was arguing that the Jesus in the Talmud is not the Jesus that the Christians worship, thereby eliminating all the problems in the Talmud that don't say nice things about Jesus.
Right, and let me just say that this is a very important point, and the question is how scholarly will we make this discussion tonight, given that if we given out some of the textual quotations will make it a little bit easier to follow. But you have to understand, this idea that the Jesus of the Talmud is not the Jesus of the Gospels is something that I embrace in Kosher Jesus. You have to understand, the Talmud speaks about Jesus being a student of Joshua ben Prachia, Joshua ben Prachia. He died 130 years before the Jesus of Nazareth could have been born. So in all likelihood, the Talmud is speaking about a different Jesus, and we should not be surprised at that, and don't think, oh, this is some sort of Jewish whitewashing. The name Jesus was very common in the Second Temple. Yeshua, it's a very common Jewish name. Josephus lists 22 major Jesus figures. The Seder HaDoros, the book of Jewish chronology, lists 2 great Jesus figures. The student of Shua B'Rachah, and then the Jesus that's credited in starting Christianity. So, yes, this is a very widespread idea.
Thank you for explaining that, by the way. I had to jump to the conclusion. People might have known that. There was a famous rabbi, Prophet Duran, who argued that Jesus was not really Christian. He defended Jesus, even Paul, and he said that only the Gentiles didn't have to keep the Torah. In the 18th century, Rabbi Yaakov Ebed was actually kind of kind to the Christians and to Christianity. And there are many contemporary scholars that you quote in the book who do not seem to be very critical. So with all this background of Jews who seem to have embraced taking a more holistic approach to Jesus, looking at this more deeply, taking a scholarly approach, how is it that you have become the target, and why are you such a convenient, punching bag all of a sudden? And I don't mean this as a softball question, I really mean it. Why now are people just not looking at the record?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer. It's a good question. Why has this book become such an incredible target so quickly and so pervasively? I think there's a number of reasons. First of all, I think it's mostly been targeted by people who work in the anti-missionary field. And anti-missionaries are trained to look at Christians as people who want to convert us. Now that may have been true before, but I think we have to take a new approach. Of course, we have to be weary of missionizing efforts. I have more than 20 debates with America's leading Jewish Christian missionary, Dr. Michael Brown. We're going to be debating this book again, God willing, on March 13th in New York. So of course we have to resist missionary efforts, but we can't see Christians primarily as people who want to missionize us. You know, you need to understand, the political isolation of Israel is so extreme that it is the second most hated nation in the world after North Korea. And this is the degree to which Israel's been abandoned by the whole world. When I was a rabbi at Oxford, and you and I worked together, there's pictures in my home with the two of us hosting people like Diego and Maradona together. Do you remember that? I mean, we were still able to bring, I brought 6 Israeli prime ministers to lecture at Oxford. 5.
Rebbe.
Right, correct. So 5 Israeli prime ministers, and there would be protests, but they could speak. Danny Ayalon tried to speak at Oxford, the deputy foreign minister of Israel, last year. There was a riot. They made it impossible for him to even give a speech. This is happening on campuses throughout Europe, happening at UC Irvine. So evangelical Christians are real friends. And yet the Jewish community, I think, is very suspicious of the friendship. And we constantly hear, they're only our friends because the book of Revelation says that when Jews are back on their land, Jesus will come back. And it'll lead to the apocalypse. It'll lead to Armageddon. I don't care what the motivation behind evangelical Christian friendship is. In Judaism, action is more important than motivation. But I actually believe that their motivation, for the most part, is very sincere. They read the Bible and they believe that through Israel they will be blessed. And that's what you'll hear evangelical Christians telling you. So for those people who are attacking the book, I think they're saying, we don't want to hear anything about Jesus because that opens the door for Christians to come and missionize us. But that also presupposes that we have no ability to influence the Christian community with the Jewishness of Jesus. Rather, they're going to influence us with the Christianity of Christ. But the real story of Jesus is that he was a Jew, and it's time to remove this mummified personality under the cloak of Christianity, where he has been buried for 2,000 years, and allow his Jewish personality to really breathe free. That's why I want to see the content of the book debated. So why is the book being attacked? Probably because it's a populist book. It has to have a scholarly base, so it can't make this argument. But it's written for the layperson. So that's the first thing. It's mainstreaming these ideas that have existed, that absolutely are precedented.
But they can really the academy.
Right. And now they're afraid. And also they can say, scholars discuss it, that's one thing. But if you're letting people on the street who barely know their own Judaism and now they're going to be reading about Jesus, where's that going to lead them? I believe it's going to lead to a strengthening of their Judaism. Even though this book's primary audience is a Christian audience. But for the Jewish community, I think it will lead to a strengthening of their Judaism when we see how impactful Judaism has been on the rest of the world. And when you begin to see how the principal teachings of Jesus, like the Sermon on the Mount, just one chapter of the book traces virtually every verse of the Sermon on the Mount, beginning in Matthew chapter 5, back to its original origin in the Torah. And this is the most famous speech that was ever given. You know, it's almost like we realize that the speeches of Martin Luther King, the greatest oratory of the 20th century, we know to trace that back to the Hebrew Bible because he was very open about tracing it back. Martin Luther King I was on the Tavis Smiley show today, and I spoke about how Martin Luther King took the Hebrew Bible and he made it a living document by which people marched. But when it comes to the New Testament, we don't connect the dots. We don't realize that so much of this is Judaism. So I think that's the reason. It's primarily anti-missionary so far we've been attacking it. We'll wait to see how the rest of the community begins to respond to it once the book goes on sale. But for me, the most interesting part is going to be how is the Jewish community going to respond to the book? I'm sorry, how is the Christian community going to respond to the book? Because like you said, Michael Brown, my 15-year debating and sparring partner, who is a Jew converted to Christianity, he wrote a piece that was very interesting. And he was like mesmerized. He said, I can't believe that the Jews have a problem with this book. He said, we Christians have significant issues with the book, and I'm sitting here preparing all my responses to the book. And I never expected the criticism come from the Jewish community. I have to say the same thing. I mean, last night I was sitting with family, and we were talking about the book, and they said, surely, Shmuley, you expected this. I honestly did not. I did not expect this level of ferocious criticism. But I don't mind it so long as it doesn't get personal. The debate is never about when things get personal. We've seen too much religious fanaticism stemming from the Jewish community of late for this to be allowed to continue unchecked. Whether it's little girls being spat on at the age of 8 because they're not sufficiently modestly dressed, which by the way was a lie. The girl was, I'm not defending, God forbid, what happened. Even if the girl wasn't dressed modestly, an 8-year-old girl, it's disgusting, it's an abomination. But she was dressed modestly. But or a female soldier being told to go to the back of a bus as if we're going to practice gender apartheid on Israel's buses. We're seeing this. And then suddenly, 2 weeks later, a well-known rabbi says that a book is banned, and commands the whole Jewish community. He names himself an authority, tells the whole Jewish community they have no right to read the book, and bans the book without giving a single reason. We're not the people who ban books, we're the people of the book. And if you have a problem with the book, say what the problem is. Michael Skoback from Jews for Judaism criticized the book yesterday. I have no problem with criticism. He began with a bit of a gratuitous, personal kind of insult. No, he wrote that, no doubt Shmuley is reveling in all the attention. I mean, he doesn't even know me, so he's making an assumption that I'm reveling in this attention. There are books that sell without personal attack. Don't think that the controversy is only good for selling the book. There are books that don't have a lot of controversy that become bestsellers. So it's not like I'm enjoying this or that I want it. I'm not enjoying it. That the personal attacks are not necessary. But the rest of Skoback's thing, which I will respond to, by the way, I have no problem with it at all. This book is meant to start a conversation. It's time that the Christians had a conversation about the Jewishness of Jesus. And it's time for the Jews to begin to extract the universality of the teachings and wisdom of the Torah and share that light with the rest of the world.
You had a great part of the book where you were discussing how there were many redeemers, people who claimed to be perhaps the next Messiah. After all, it was incredible tumultuous time. The Romans were occupying. Things were bad. People were starving. People weren't being able to practice their religion freely. There were different camps about how to deal with the situation. One of them was to assimilate and to be more aligned with the Romans, and the others, the Pharisees, were in fact the opposite. And you positioned Jesus as a hardcore Pharisee, which was in line with keeping with the Torah and in trying to remove Roman rule. And you had a great line there where you said there were many people who were coming forward, hoping to be the Redeemers. And the typical Jewish response is, when somebody says that they're the Messiah, is not to stone them to death, or not to put them in front of a trial, but to kind of position, well, let's see what happens. And you also brought up a very important point in the book, which was very good to me, when I wasn't familiar with the trial of Jesus. My knowledge of Christianity is very limited. And you spoke about the trial of Jesus, and apparently this is one of the leading ways in which Christian anti-Semitism has been passed along. And one at a time, you took all of these reasons why he might have been condemned to death by the Sanhedrin, and showed how the Sanhedrin would never have condemned someone to death for those issues.
Right. The major source of Christian anti-Semitism through the generations has been this charge that we killed Jesus. So in the book, and with the assistance of the phenomenal British Jewish scholar Clement, who passed away a few years ago, I look at motive. You know, if God forbid a body is found somewhere here in Los Angeles, and the LAPD is investigating who did the murder, the first thing they look for is motive. Without motive, they will never get a murder charge. They can't arrest you, they certainly can't convict you. There has to be a motive. So the question is, if the Jews killed Jesus, what was the motive? Why did we want to kill him? So essentially the New Testament says 5 things. A, he declared himself to be God. B, he said he was the Messiah. C, he predicted the destruction of the temple. D, he violated the Sabbath. And E, he abrogated the law. He said the Torah is no longer applicable. And to briefly go through these things, if I declare myself to be God right here, right now, that is not blasphemy. Blasphemy in Judaism is not, I can say, I am God. What would you all think? That Shmuley is a blasphemer? That Shmuley is crazy? That maybe he needs to be locked up? First of all, I say that Jesus never claimed to be divine. He never claimed to be divine. He refers to himself as Son of Man. Yes, in the New Testaments, you'll see that the M is capitalized, but anyone who knows Hebrew, Ben Adam, son of Adam, is a very common expression that we use about every human being, but it's especially an appellation used by prophets. Ezekiel is referred to by God constantly as the Son of Man. It's not capitalized. Man is Adam. Man is not God, obviously. But even if Jesus were to have declared himself to be a deity, as the book of John seems to say, that is not blasphemy. Blasphemy is where you curse God. Secondly, declaring himself to be the Messiah, there's nothing wrong with anyone declaring himself to be the Messiah. The whole approach to our idea of the Messiah, which is not divine, is the Messiah has to do certain things. He has to bring about world peace, he has to end war, he has to end famine and disease and hunger. He has to rebuild the temple, he has to establish Jewish sovereignty and Jewish political independence. And whoever does that is going to be the Messiah. So anyone who declares himself to be the Messiah, our approach is, we'll sit and wait. We're going to see whether you fulfill the criteria. I can declare myself the President of the United States, but if I don't win primaries and if I don't win an election, I'm not the President of the United States. No one's going to be offended by the claim. They're going to say, you didn't do what a president needs to do. And the same thing is true with the Messiah. As far as predicting the destruction of the temple, every prophet predicted the destruction of the temple. There was nothing scandalous about it. Isaiah, Jeremiah, all make it clear if the Jews are sinful, the temple will be destroyed. And the Jews knew the temple was on its way to being destroyed, especially under Roman dominance. Breaking the Sabbath, I explained in the book that Jesus never did any such thing. When he did break the Sabbath and allowed his students, he quotes a Talmudic passage that it is not man that is created for the Sabbath, it is the Sabbath that's created for man. You're allowed to break the Sabbath when your life is endangered, and I explained in the book that Jesus' life was in danger along with his students, which is why he allows them to tear wheat out on Shabbat. Finally, the application of the law. Not only did Jesus not say that we no longer have to keep the Torah, he said precisely the opposite. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 18, Jesus says that we have to keep every last letter of the Torah and every last crown of the letter Yud, which is the smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet. If you don't even keep that tiny little line that comes out of the Yud, he says you are the least in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus observed the entire Torah. He led a Jewish life. He fought as a Jew, died as a Jew, worshipped as a Jew, prayed as a Jew. So the Jews had no motive to kill him. So here we have the most insidious charge ever lodged against a people, that they killed God, that they killed Jesus, the founder of Christianity, and yet there's absolutely no motive. Finally, if you look in Luke chapter 13, verse 31, you will see that the Pharisees actually come to Jesus and warn him that Herod wants to kill you. And they save his life. So whatever people think about the theory of the book, even if you dismiss the central organizing principle of the book, you still have to deal with the evidence. If the rabbis want Jesus dead, and if they're handing him over to Pontius Pilate to have him crucified, why are they saving his life when it comes to Herod? Aside from the fact, by the way, I don't want to go on too long here, but Pontius Pilate was the Saddam Hussein of the ancient world. He was a brutal tyrant, he was a brutal killer. He was the only Roman prefect who was actually recalled by Rome because of his brutality. So just imagine if you're considered violent by Roman standards. And yet he was so violent that he was recalled by the Emperor Tiberius. So do you really believe Mel Gibson's portrayal of Pontius Pilate in The Passion of the Christ? Or the New Testament's portrayal of Pontius Pilate in the book of Matthew, where he's portrayed as a humanitarian who wants to save Jesus' life? The Jews are the bloodthirsty ones, and the Romans are suddenly the humanitarians? That's no historian would accept that, especially when it comes to Pontius Pilate. And we have many letters dating from Pilate's time, written by Roman allies, Roman vassals, vassal kings, complaining to the Roman Senate about what a barbarian, what an animal Pontius Pilate is. But finally, Jesus himself condemns Pontius Pilate in Luke chapter 13, verse 1. It says, Jesus' students then came to him and told him that Pilate had suddenly slaughtered a whole bunch of Jews, and he was such a monster that he took their blood after he killed them, and he had it mixed with the sacrifices that were brought on the altar of the temple. And Jesus says to them, do you really think these people who were murdered by Pilate are any less virtuous than you? I tell you, if you don't fear God or you can do everything that God wants, you too will end up victims of Pilate's brutality. So here you have Jesus speaking about what a brutal animal Pilate is. And then suddenly he's whitewashed in the book of Matthew, and the Jews are looking at Pilate after he says, after the famous Ecce Homo incident, where he behold the man, they demand that Jesus be brought, and they're looking at him. And he says, I'm going to wash my hands to the death of this man. And he literally washes his hands, which is where this expression comes from, washing your hands or something. And then he says, do you really want Jesus dead? But he's innocent. And the Jews famously answer, and this has been the most anti-Semitic line ever recorded in world history. They famously say,
let his blood be upon us and upon our children.
Thank you. Let his blood be upon us and upon our children. A line so inflammatory that even Mel Gibson decided not to translate it. The only thing in The Passion of the Christ that was not translated from Aramaic into English is that line. Even Mel Gibson thought that line was inflammatory.
That's the litmus test.
So it seems.
I'd like to take a moment to take a question from the audience. Does anybody here have a question they'd like to ask? Okay, we'll start in the front row.
Okay, I found it very interesting, your comment saying that the Jewishness of Jesus is critical for establishing the humanity of Jesus, and this would help make Christianity less of a polarizing force, because historically, actually, Jews have had a reason to fear, so to speak, the human Jesus. One goes back to the Middle Ages, where you do see this major shift in Christian theology. Talk about the human Jesus. This is a time period where we actually first get creches for Christmas. The idea to think about the Holy Family, the little baby Jesus with being nursed by the Virgin Mary. This is dangerous for Jews because this also ultimately leads to the idea of the Jesus who suffered, as opposed to, again, the Jesus who sits at the right hand of God the Father. So the moment you talk about Jesus suffering for our sins, you have to ask yourself, well, who caused Jesus to suffer? And you see this in the artwork, this major move to see Jesus in pain on the cross. So do we really want the human Jesus?
What's the question?
Is historically speaking, actually...
I'll rephrase. The question is that there was a shift within Christian theology where they started focusing on the suffering of Jesus and humanizing Jesus as evidence in artwork and in sculptures and in other theological novelty of the Middle Ages. And truly had discussed what about that we perhaps the Christian community was not looking at the humanity of Jesus enough.
Yes, the human Jesus leads the suffering Jesus, which leads to, well, who's responsible.
You hear that? No. Okay. Next time I'll hand out the mic. Sure.
Well, if I understand correctly, you're saying, why do we want the humanity of Jesus? Because the Jews are going to end up suffering once we experience
historically that's happened.
Right, I disagree. On the contrary, the humanity of Jesus is inextricably linked with his Jewishness. Because as a human being, which he was a Jew, and he lived as a Jew, as I said, he prayed as a Jew, he studied as a Jew, he ate as a Jew, walked as a Jew. There was a conscious effort to deprive him of that Jewishness. Our responsibility is to tell the truth. It's to go back to the original sources prior to some of the story having been edited in order to appease Roman audiences. I mean, you can't say that the story of Pilate, the way it is told, where it does implicate the Jews and exonerate the Roman arch-butcher Pontius Pilate, was not heavily edited in order to exonerate him. And is it true that Jesus really said, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's? Would anyone respect someone who were to say today, render unto Gaddafi what is Gaddafi's? Render unto Saddam what is Saddam's? Caesar, who was Caesar at the time? People like Caligula. Very, very wicked, evil people. The idea that Jesus does not resist the Romans. You know, one of the points that I make in the book is evangelical Christians today comprise 60% of the United States Armed Forces. Evangelicals are very patriotic. They fight for this country, they die for this country. They believe in resisting evil. And here's Jesus not resisting evil at all. Here's Jesus saying, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. It doesn't make sense. So, on the contrary, when we discover the humanity of Jesus, I think it's the Romans who suffer, not the Jews. The real story is that Jesus had a beef with the Romans, as did every Jew at that time. And I have to tell you, what started me thinking along these lines was a brilliant insight by Maccabee, which is, you know, there's a famous Talmudic expression. Ikar chasam min ha-sefer. Sometimes the strongest arguments come about with what is not said as opposed to what is said. Maccabee makes this incredible point that really got me thinking. He says, what's missing in the New Testament? And I'm trying to think, before I look at the answer, like, what's missing in the New Testament? As you read it, what is not there? You know what's not there? The Romans. There are barely any Romans in the New Testament. Where'd they go? I mean, ancient Israel, Judea, the Roman province of Judea, is under Roman. There are all these Roman legions occupied, including the 10th legion, which is Julius Caesar's legion. And they are a brutal occupying force, and yet they're barely mentioned in the New Testament. There are Roman soldiers everywhere, but they're barely mentioned. And when they are mentioned, like Pilate, they're always nice, they're always good people. When we know that the exact opposite is true, the Romans were the most brutal nation of all time. They dominated the world through brute force, and they had the thin Hellenistic veneer. They were envious of the Greeks. But underneath that veneer was the bloody spectacle spectacle of gladiatorial combat. People dying in arenas. The Romans love this stuff. Their entertainment was people having their heads chopped off. And yet they're not mentioned in the New Testament. And that's where Maccabee really started me thinking, in some of the earliest origins of the Kosher Jesus book, that there seems to have been a conscious effort to remove the Romans from the story and to scrub the Romans where they were forced to appear. But certainly, when it came to the death of Jesus, that became all important. Vindicate the Romans and blame the Jews. So I don't agree that when you examine the humanity of Jesus, it's the Jews who will be blamed for his suffering. Any historical retelling of the true story of the death of Jesus will have the Romans implicated rather than the Jews.
Thank you. Next question. I'm going to come down here.
Hi, I'm Henry Kaufman. My question is there anywhere in Jewish law that says how a person is supposed to treat a Messiah? Let's say there was a real Messiah here now, and everyone in the Jewish world believed he was the true, real Messiah. Is that Messiah supposed to be worshipped? Because to me, I thought the Jewish life were only supposed to worship God. So I think I never hear in the synagogue or from a rabbi how one is supposed to treat the Messiah.
If you don't mind me asking, are you Jewish or?
I converted to Judaism.
Okay. And your question is in Judaism, how are we supposed to treat the Messiah?
Right.
Right. It's very simple. I'm not here to plug books, but I wrote a book about the Messiah. It was one of my first books. It's called The Wolf Shall Lie with the Lamb, based on Isaiah chapter 11, a famous prophecy. The Messiah is a Jewish king who will establish Jewish sovereignty, who will throw off the yoke of oppression, of Gentile oppression from the Jewish nation. Political independence is his principal occupation. It's establishing the freedom and the liberty of the Jews. And he will bring about a glorious messianic epoch, characterized in part by some of the things I mentioned before, which is world peace, men beating their swords into plowshares, nations no longer being at war with one another, the wolf shall lie with the lamb, an era of abundance, an era of plenty. Then there are some disputes as to whether he has to do some other things that are truly miraculous, like the resurrection of the dead, that everyone agrees he has to at least lay the foundation stone of the temple and begin the rebuilding of the temple, and things like that, because when the Jews have total sovereignty over the land, they're supposed to rebuild the temple. But he's not a God. Maimonides even says that the Messiah is going to die. He's not going to live eternally. He won't be killed, but he'll die a natural death. He will simply live. All the people there will, in the Messianic era, will live much longer, according to Maimonides, because he says there will be no stress in the world. Remember, he was a doctor. So Maimonides said that stress kills. It took us almost 800 years after he died to discover this scientifically, that stress is one of the leading causes of heart disease and many other ailments. But Maimonides said that the Messiah would die, and then he would be succeeded by his son, the King Messiah. Messiah means anointed. So does the word Christos. It is really St. Paul who begins to deify Jesus. It is really St. Paul who starts speaking of Jesus in divine terms. And that's why in the book I distinguish between the synoptic gospels of Mark, Matthew, and Luke versus the Gospel of John, which really is radically different than the synoptic gospels. The synoptic gospels are all very similar. They tell very similar stories of Jesus. John is like a radical departure where Jesus has already really become a deity. But the Messiah is not a deity.
Next question. Yes, sir, in the back.
I just wanted to ask, I understand you were attacked by certain rabbis about, I don't know which are rabbis. How did the group of Jesus handle it?
How do they handle?
You know you were attacked by rabbis. How did you choose Jesus?
How did they receive the book?
How did they receive it?
Well, so far, you can read Dr. Michael Brown's piece that he wrote, which is really interesting. Michael Brown is my debating partner. He's the world's foremost Jewish Christian missionary. Who's written 20 books trying to convert Jews to... he's a missionary to all people, but his focus is on Jews because he's a Jew. He wrote a piece where he was very surprised about all the Jewish attacks, saying, it's we Christians who are scrambling to respond to this book. And Michael already challenged me to a debate on the book, which I'm going to do, God willing, on March 13th. So their response to the book is that they're, again, there's no official Jews. When we say Jews for Jesus, the truth is Jews for Jesus is now a very small, almost insignificant organization. They've been overtaken by larger missionizing groups to Jews, like Chosen People Ministries and others. Chosen People's response was to ask me if I would debate Michael Brown about the book, and we'll do a debate about the book. But let me just get back to attacks that have come from the Chabad community. Look, the first thing is, as I said before, as long as you want to talk about the book, I'm open to talk. If you want to personalize things, not you, Rabbi Benzikin, very fine communal rabbi, whose synagogue I have the honor of speaking at from time to time. It's very nice to see you this evening. But if you want to ban the book and not give a reason, that's how am I supposed to respond to that? That undermines the whole pretense of scholarship. We Jews are not into book bans. We're not Khomeini. We don't issue fatwas against authors. It's bizarre. I mean, that particular attack was truly bizarre from Rabbi Emanuel Shochat. And to be honest, I feel for him because I think it undermined his reputation as a scholar. A scholar doesn't do that. A scholar is not Khomeini. We don't do things like that. But I'm prepared to respond to anyone who wants to have a proper dialogue on the book. And I'm not divine. It could be the book is not perfect. It probably is, but it could be it's a joke. He said the book is perfect. Obviously, the book's supposed to start a conversation. But what I found interesting about the attacks that came from the Chabad community in particular, beyond the vitriol, the incitement almost to violence on the part of some of the commentary on the blogs, which was very irresponsible for editors to leave that stuff up. I mean, are there always going to be crazy people who post crazy stuff? Of course. But editors are not supposed to put that stuff up. You don't put up comments that say, we're going to throw rocks at you, and disgusting comments that bring in other people. And I don't even want to talk about how grotesque some of this stuff was. And what an embarrassment to Chabad. I am Chabad, proudly Chabad. Chabad is my life. It's what I chose when I was a little boy, and it's what I'll never give up. And it's how I raise my children. But the first thing is I was very disappointed in how personal the attacks became. Calls for excommunication and all this kind of nonsense. I mean, censorship always backfires. All they did was make the book hit bestseller lists around the world. Although I still would have preferred for it to become a bestseller without that level of militancy. But
it's the first event I've been part of where I received emails asking me to stop it.
Yeah, well, okay. I'm glad you did. I'm amazed, really.
Oh yes,
I've been involved in 50 events like that.
I won't say my group, but I got some emails and they were outlining all the reasons why we shouldn't be involved in this, and they thought it was a travesty and it wasn't Jewish, and how don't you know that all the rabbis have spoken out against this and I shouldn't be involved, and they actually said, I'm sure you spoke to very, very high rabbinic authorities in order to pursue this mission and so forth.
Right. But finally, the issue of attack coming from the Chabad community, and again, I say this as someone who is Chabad, the Chabad community has a messianic issue it has to address. And the fact that suddenly everyone woke up about my book when there's a messianic issue that needs to be addressed, and I'm going to leave it for the Chabad, for those in positions of authority in Chabad to determine how they will address the messianic issue, which the rest of the Jewish world is watching very closely and has been watching it for a number of years. I'll leave it but that seems to be more serious than the book that I wrote. So that's kind of bizarre that everybody woke up now when this issue has been festering and lingering for quite some time.
I don't see how it's possible that people have no problem, that they go every month, they go to the kever, they took their shoes off, they take their shoes off, and they go, I don't know to who they go to, what do they do, what do they say, what they talk, but somehow you do, it's very example. That's something that needs to be really done.
Well, let me just address this briefly, although it'll take us off to a tangent. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was my inspiration and the person due to whom I became a rabbi. I was a child of divorce from here in Los Angeles, moved to Miami, And the Rebbe helped me to heal, and he gave me my passion for Judaism. And I ended up in Oxford because of it. I ended up in Australia first as a student. I went to marry my wife without the Rebbe. So I owe the Rebbe a great deal. I have been one of the foremost advocates in Chabad, writing column after column, giving speech after speech, that we in Chabad have to elevate the humanity of the Rebbe as a source of inspiration for the Jewish world and beyond. Because the Rebbe was such an incredible human being. You know, when he died, and I was at his funeral, on the plane on the way home, I wrote an essay that was republished in Chabad publications around the world. You might be able to still find it, written 16 years ago. It was called The Colossus in Me. And I started by saying that when I was a little boy and I went to see the Rebbe for the first time, everyone was telling me what a great scholar he is, a miracle worker, but what I noticed was that he was the most famous rabbi in the world, but he had holes in the bottoms of his shoes. And I couldn't believe it. Why? He had no materialism in him. And then when his wife died, he moved into his own office, living in a place like the size of this, gave up his house to the Chabad Women's Organization. And he never took a vacation in over 40 years. And he would sit and praying for people at the kever of his father-in-law. And he was a great human being. And the moment we begin to focus on things that aren't about his humanity, I don't think it's as inspirational. Before we even talk about other issues that are associated with problems that can arise from a different kind of focus, I don't think it's as effective. I think people are inspired by people. And we're all looking for sources of inspiration, and in the Jewish world, there aren't enough today. So, the Messianic issue in Chabad is one that needs to be addressed. And notice that I'm not addressing it tonight. I'm saying it needs to be addressed because it's not for me to address it. It's for the people but what I am certainly saying is that the fact that this book could create such controversy in Lubavitch is bizarre. And it says to me there must be an ulterior agenda at work. Because do I really think that this book is a threat to the continuity of the Jewish people? I mean, come on. If it were, this place, people would be hanging from the rafters in the ceiling, both pro and con. There's an agenda behind a lot of these attacks. And I would say, I don't know, there may be a number of agendas, but certainly one of the agendas is, I think there is great discomfort in the Jewish community about our relationship with non-Jews in general, Christians in particular, and we don't know how to go about it. On the one hand, we all say Israel has no friends. On the other hand, it's not like we really know how to make friends well. The Jewish community continues to be very insular. The Jewish community continues to be very, very self-ghettoized. The only time that I experienced this level of attack before, and Yonah might remember it, was when my L'chaim Society at the University of Oxford welcomed tens of thousands of non-Jews to be members. And we had an African-American president who became the leader of our organization at Oxford. He was a Rhodes Scholar by the name of Cory Booker. Who today, Mayor of Newark, and just voted one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world. But what's interesting is that Cory Booker is today the most sought-after speaker probably in the American Jewish community to lecture on Judaism to Jews, even though he remains a devout Christian. And he and I study Torah together, a few times a week, and have studied for 20 years together. But we don't believe in the ability of Judaism to impact on the outside world. We only think that if Jews are exposed to the outside world, they're going to be influenced by it instead of doing the influencing. Which begs the question, then why is Chabad, who actually believes it can influence the outside world, why are they the biggest critics of the book? But notice that Chabad has really relinquished the Rebbe's grander vision for impacting non-Jews. The Rebbe used to speak all the time about teaching non-Jews the Noahide covenant. The Rebbe used to speak all the time. Whenever he spoke on television, which was several times a year, they would take his more famous Farbrengens, the public lectures, and they would televise them on cable access channels, and he would always speak to the non-Jewish audiences. But that has disappeared from Chabad. You will find it almost nowhere. So that when a book like this, which is written primarily for the Christian community, people went berserk.
Well, there's so many questions. I'm going to go over to this side of the room for one moment.
Hi, my name is Jerome Allen. Two things. First, I'll start with statement because Jewishness and Jewishness. One is, as somebody who went to school in Mississippi, I always had a little bit of trouble about the idea of killing Christ, because I always said, you should thank me. You were kicked down this much now because of that. So that's frustrating. But the question is this, which is, do you
how do they respond to that?
how do they respond to that?
Well, you're still here, so I guess...
I'm still here. I'm big, so, but not as big as many Southerners. So, how did they respond to that? With a perplexed look. With a perplexed look.
Were you called a Christ killer?
Was I called a Christ killer? No. I was no, maybe once.
But one generation back, like I hear, and I'm sure many of you in the audience can second this, our parents' generation, they were all called Christ killers in their schools, in public school. My mother heard this a lot in school. I mean, growing up in the United States. And she grew up in Brooklyn, although the people who did grow up in the South, where it was much more common.
In the South, it's much more lack of ability to believe that somebody did not believe in Jesus is much more prevalent. Just the things are wrong, whatever. Anyway, so yeah, just lack of belief that you couldn't believe in Jesus. The strong overriding. But my question is this: do you think that it would make any impact? Since I guess you're very pro-interfaith dialogue, do you think that would have made a larger impact had there been a more pro-Jewish stance on interfaith dialogue or this kind of dialogue over the years, and what has changed that volume is obvious, big worldwide kind of changes as to why, and what influence that has on your thinking?
So let me stay away from words like interfaith dialogue. I've never liked those words. To me, it has a very watery kind of feeling. It sounds like a diluted conversation. When I lived in England, that was very popular, interfaith dialogue. I'm not into interfaith dialogue. People coming together and there's no need for us to justify our beliefs to anyone else, and they don't have to justify their beliefs to us. And what's the purpose of interfaith dialogue? People are going to worship separately. I believe in the viability of Judaism and Christianity and Islam as great monotheistic faiths, etc. I'm talking about something different. I'm talking about an authentic relationship. Jews and Christians are now united in support for Israel. Jews and Christians are united in the United States through Judeo-Christian values. Many of our values-based agenda that doesn't concern Israel overlaps. Look, the Lubavitch Rebbe was adamant that there should be a moment of silence in public schools. We're not going to bring prayer back to public schools, almost certainly. And maybe we shouldn't have prayers in public schools because a lot of Jewish kids were forced to pray to Jesus, etc. We're not looking to impose religion on anyone, but a moment of silence would simply mean that children have a moment to reflect on a power that may be higher than them, and maybe it can deepen the personality of a child and give them something to talk about other than what they watched on television. The Rebbe wanted Jews to work with Catholics on that. And that's Chabad, let alone organizations that regularly work with Christian, with the Catholic Church or Christian organizations on a values-based objective. How could you have those relationships when they're somewhat fraught? And we can never talk about the Jewishness of Jesus. It remains something that divides us instead of something that can unite us. We can understand the same personality in very different ways. Look at Martin Luther King for a moment. I have many times said that Martin Luther King was the greatest American of the 20th century because he restored America to its founding ideals. This is the greatest country in the world, and yet, while our soldiers were liberating Jews from Dachau, Majdanek, Gross-Rosen, Sobibor, a black kid kicking a soccer ball in 110-degree heat in Selma, Alabama, couldn't take a drink of water from the fountain. That was a major contradiction. He got rid of that contradiction. Now, I'm a white Jew, so I approach King in a very different way than, say, a black Christian might. For them, he's the great martyr, the great fallen leader who was almost Moses-like in liberating them from Jim Crow laws and segregation. But I think I never experienced that level of segregation. America has been much better than the Jews than it has been to the blacks. So I experience him as this great speaker on biblical themes that brought the Bible to life. And as a Jew, I'm very excited by his speeches as a result. My God, if rabbis could only demonstrate the modern application of the Torah the way King did in creating the whole civil rights movement based on the Hebrew prophets. So we approach it from totally different perspectives, and yet King remains a bridge between the black and Jewish communities till this very day. Now, extrapolating from that, why can't Jesus be the same thing to Jews and Christians? Christians are going to look at Jesus as Redeemer, Savior, Messiah. Jews are not going to accept those things. We're certainly never going to get even close to the divinity of Jesus, and I argue very forcefully in the book not only against his divinity, but against the belief that he ever claimed to be divine. But that doesn't mean that we can't use him as a bridge, even as we understand Jesus in totally different ways. Jews can focus on the Jewishness and what he taught, finding its origin in the Torah. And Christians can feel enriched by that Jewishness, even as they see in him something far more than the Jews did. Now, a lot of Jews are going to say, but the moment you bring Jesus into the equation, you're automatically going to, you're going to bring Christianity to the Jewish community. Really? Do we do that when we speak about Martin Luther King, who's a reverend? Do we automatically open the floodgates to Christianity? I can give you 1,000 examples of great Christians who Jews are very inspired by today, let alone Jesus who was never a Christian. He was never a Christian, ever. Christianity would have been utterly foreign to him. And it's almost an insult to the Jewish community when we say, we can't get near this because the Jews, as soon as they take a whiff of this, they're going to dump their Judaism. Come on, talk about fear tactics. Talk about having no confidence in your own community. All of these attacks on me that are saying that your book is going to lead to the dissolution of Judaism, that's how much confidence we have in our community? One book finished off a 3,300-year-old tradition? It's unbelievable. I have greater faith in our community. But I also know that Christians want to learn about the Jewishness of Jesus. I was sitting with a journalist the other day, and I told him that, in fact, I think he's even here tonight, so I say that because I don't want to be repetitive, that Time Magazine did a cover story 2 years ago. Every year in the summer they do this edition, the 10 ideas that are most shaking the world. And idea number 7 was, one of the 10 ideas most shaking the world is Christians rediscovering the Jewishness of Jesus.
Before I get to your question, I'd like to ask one. Okay, you're next.
So why did you proceed if you were told to drop it?
First of all, I know you. And we had the opportunity over our time in Oxford to speak about all kinds of issues. And I have faith in you. And I know that you're not going to write a book which is going to abandon the Jewish faith. And so it's basically my trust in what you're doing. And by the way, if somebody tries to ban a book in the Jewish community, God, that makes me want to read it and know what's in it. And like, wow, that must be the best book out there. So on both accounts, they totally lost me. And I wrote a very polite reply to him. First of all, I said that censorship of this kind is just not acceptable in the Jewish community at all. I said you're going to help him sell way more books. If you're trying to prevent people from hearing him, more people are going to hear him. And lastly, I said, please, you have a right to disagree with Shmuley, but how dare you ask me to stop something that clearly I feel is okay to do? I had a chance to meet with a pastor here in the room. Welcome. And so please don't be offended by my question. Shmuley, you spent a lot of time in the book, a lot of time kind of hacking away at some dearly held Christian beliefs. And I know you don't do it as a means in any way that you want to offend the Christian community, because clearly that's not your purpose. The book was written for them. And yet something, when I was going through all these passages and chapters, I said, if on one hand you want so deeply for the Jewish community, for the Christian community to realize that there are serious flaws as Jesus is presented in the New Testament, and yet on the other hand you want them to stay Christian and to honor the Christianity, and you love Christians for who they are, they should keep being Christian. Isn't there kind of a tension there?
I would like to believe that I have the love of the American evangelical community for the most part. They watch my TV show, our show on the home. They're the biggest viewers of the show because they're very thankful that there's a show on television that's about healing families instead of exploiting the dysfunction families. They read my essays. In 2004, a week before the election between George W. Bush and John Kerry, I wrote an article called My Love Affair with Evangelical Christians. So the reason why the evangelicals respect me, I'd like to believe, is that I have an honest relationship with him. It's not a fraudulent relationship. It's not based on being a suck-up or a brown-noser or any synonym that is not appropriate for a shul. Our Christian evangelical brothers know my admiration for them, but they also know where I part ways. And it is time for our Christian brothers and sisters not only to discover the Jewishness of Jesus, but to be prepared to question things in their tradition that are not polite to the Jewish people. Did Jesus really say in John chapter 8, verse 8, that the Jews are children of Satan? Did Jesus really say in John chapter 8 that the Jews could never know their Father in heaven, they could never know God? Did Jesus really say in John chapter 8 that the Jews would never have a place in heaven? Does Jesus really want Jews who practice Judaism to go to hell for all eternity, which is what many of our evangelical brothers and sisters believe? That you can lead a totally righteous Jewish life, but if you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to the big rotisserie in hell with an apple stuck in your mouth, and you're going to burn forever. That would make Jesus immoral. It would make him immoral. Mike Brown and I have become dear friends through our debates. Even though if you watch debates that are widely available on YouTube, you would never believe that we can be friends because we have to take no prisoners debates. We assail each other. I mean, it's not personal. It's all text-based and hopefully scholarly debates, but take no prisoner debates. But we become friends. And amidst that friendship, and Mike came to my daughter's wedding. I danced with him at my daughter's wedding. But amidst that friendship, I go after him damn hard in my book for the things that he writes in his books that Jews are going to hell. No, he doesn't say that exactly. Let me be fair. I don't want to be easy. You'll read Kosher Jesus, you'll see the quotes in context. But he certainly believes that if you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to hell. And that means even Jews perhaps died in the Holocaust. That they're going to go to hell. I'm sorry. That is a belief that our Christian brothers and sisters can no longer entertain. I'm sorry. And if someone's going to say, Shmuel, who are you to preach to others what they should believe? No, there's a universal code of morality and ethics by which we must all live. And in the same way, no Jew should ever, God forbid, say or believe that a Christian who leads a righteous life is going to go to hell. That's ridiculous. And thank God, going back to the Talmud, we believe that non-Jews who lead righteous lives are going to heaven. They're going to eternity. It says that in the Talmud. The Talmud says that a Christian who worships, that a non-Jew, predates Christianity, that a non-Jew who leads a righteous life is as holy as a Jewish high priest. Could you imagine that? Going back 2,000 years before any kind of interfaith dialogue started, these are amazing statements. We are all bound by a universal code of morality. And the belief, and here's where our difference. Like someone said to me, the criticism you're getting is similar to what Rabbi Shlomo Riskin got like 2 or 3 years ago in Israel when he spoke about Jesus being a great rabbi and a great scholar. And he was viciously attacked in Israel. Now, of course, I would never condone those attacks. But I would like to draw a difference between what he said and what I say. He is very close to the evangelical community, and he speaks about Jesus as a bridge. But he doesn't go and tell them how Christians need to change some of the things they believe about Jesus based on New Testament scripture, and I do. And if it means that Christians are going to be a little bit uncomfortable, so be it. But at least they know where they stand with me. It's an authentic relationship. We can't have a fraudulent relationship with our Christian brothers and sisters. That's an insult. It's an insult to have a fraudulent relationship with anybody. I was at Pastor John Hagee's Kufi dinner, Christians United for Israel. 5,000 Christians waving Israeli flags in the Washington Convention Center, singing Israeli songs. And everyone gets up to say a prayer and they're afraid to say Jesus. One said it at the very end. And the Jews are afraid to say it. I take the opposite approach. I have no problem with Christians praying to Jesus in my presence. But I want them to know, in the same way that they have every right to assert their faith and belief, we have a right and a responsibility, since Jesus was a Jew, he was not a Christian, to teach them about the Jewishness of Jesus, and to modify some essential Christian tenets based on Jesus' Jewishness. Now, if you say to me, but they're not going to do it, I don't agree. Joel Osteen, Rick Warren, these are probably the two most famous evangelical pastors in the United States. And Joel Osteen said on Larry King, when he was asked, if you don't believe in Jesus, do you go to hell? And he said, it is not for me to judge who goes to heaven or hell. Now, he was widely criticized by people like Mike Brown. Mike Brown criticized him in one of our debates. Criticized Joel Osteen for taking this very soft line. But I got to tell you, most Christian pastors on TV are now following Joel Osteen. They're not saying that if you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to the big barbecue. And had you told, and look, if you say that Catholics don't change their doctrine, look at Vatican II. Prior to Vatican II, the Catholic Church held the Jews responsible for killing Christ. In the early 1960s, all of this was changed. So it's not true that Catholic and Christian doctrine doesn't change. And it comes down to a matter of emphasis. It is time for our evangelical brothers and sisters to stand up and say that Jews and Judaism is a valid, absolutely valid religion and expression of godly faith. And those who live by it will go to heaven. And they should not become Christian. To Mike Brown's credit, I have to tell you, he invited me to the Fire School of Ministry in Concord, North Carolina, where he trains people to go out and convert everybody. And my lecture to his young class of missionaries was how they are hurting Christianity when they target Jews for missionary acts. Not only will we stop them, but they're hurting Christianity. Because every Jew who goes over to the other side and becomes a Christian, you have made it less possible for the world to discover the true identity of Jesus by becoming a Christian. The more you practice your Judaism, the more authentic Christianity will be. And the less you practice it, the less authentic Christianity will be. If you go on YouTube tonight and you Google Shmuley Pastor Wayne, Jerusalem. So Pastor Wayne, forgive me, I'm not remembering his last name. We only met a few times, but we're becoming friends. He has the largest evangelical church in Jerusalem. He has a big church in middle Jerusalem. I lectured there, and he tried to half-convert me in front of his whole church. And I said, no problem, but I deserve to do the same thing, right? I'm now going to convert your congregation to a belief that the Jews are the only ones who can give them a truly authentic expression of Jesus. And I did that for 45 minutes in his church. And towards the end, you'll watch the video yourselves, his entire congregation was applauding. He wasn't. We are friends. I don't think he agreed with anything that I said, but his community did. They had never really heard that before. They had heard the opposite, that they have to bring Jews to Christianity in order to save their souls. But I told them the opposite. Jews must teach them about the faith of Jesus, namely Judaism, in order for them to understand their Christianity. And that's the fact. What is the Garden of Gethsemane where Jesus was the night before he dies? What was Jesus doing in Gethsemane? What is it? Sorry?
Seder.
No, the Garden of Gethsemane has got Shmanim. It means olive garden. Jesus was hiding in an olive garden. But why? Who's Mary Magdalene? Mary Migdal. What is Migdal? What does that mean? Jesus is from Capernaum, Kfar Nachum. And yes, the Eucharist of Jesus saying that wine and the matzah are his blood and flesh. What was he doing eating these things the night before he died? You take away Judaism, and the whole life of Jesus doesn't make any sense.
We're running short on time. I did promise you a question quickly.
What do you think Jesus' mission was?
I believe that he thought that he was the Jewish Messiah. There's nothing wrong with that. I actually believe that every person has to have a certain messianic tendency within them. You don't have to be the big Messiah, like you're going to be the guy, but you have to be a Messiah to your children. You're the only one that can redeem them. You know, no surrogate. Stop raising them on TV or some other guy reading them bedtime stories. You're their personal redeemer. If you're a husband, you're your wife's only redeemer. She doesn't want another man's love. She wants yours. Stop giving her surrogates like credit cards. But there's nothing wrong with messianic impulse. There's nothing wrong with people who want to be the Messiah, so long as they understand that and the level of that responsibility. I think Jesus wanted to throw off Roman rule. I think he wanted to, I think his principal mission was to end the imposition of Roman paganism and persecution on the Jewish people. Many had attempted it before him. Bar attempted it after him. I think he was very much in the guise of Bar who followed him, obviously. And I think he was planning to lead a military insurrection. But based on the idea of like Nachshon and Aminadav. You know, when the Jews have to cross the Red Sea, they know they only have to just start the process. If they show courage, God will come and fight for them. Hashem yilachem lachem. God will fight for you. I think Jesus really believed that. I think he was very startled when he was killed so quickly by the Romans, and he became another martyr for his people. But his goal was to strengthen the observance of Judaism, teach Judaism, end corruption among the Jewish people. And there was a lot of corruption at the time, and many great rabbis were attempting. Many great rabbis of the Talmud were trying to end corruption. Look, even the Sanhedrin, the great Jewish court, exiled itself from its chamber in the Holy Temple because, as a protest against the corruption of the people. They didn't want to have to enact capital punishment. So corruption was systematic, unfortunately, especially there were so many Jews who went over to the Roman side, including Caiaphas, who turns Jesus over to Pilate, who was a Jewish traitor. And Jesus objected to all of them. He was a Pharisee. He opposed the Sadducee camp, and he opposed the Romans. His mission was to oppose the Romans and reestablish Jewish sovereignty, and he was killed by Pontius Pilate because he opposed Roman rule.
Rabbi Weiss,
Yes, well, thank you very much. I haven't read the book yet, but two things. First of all, Michael Drazen wrote the book, Their Hollow Inheritance, where he basically outlines that the New Testament is basically a plagiarism of the Talmud. And he claims that Jesus is not really a historically accurate figure, that he really, the figure of Jesus of the New Testament really was never a person that really existed. How would you say your book is different from the approach that he takes? And then one other thing I want to say as a comment is I understand what you're saying, that this book is basically, I mean, from what I understand, it sounds like this book was really written for the Christian community. It wasn't written directly at the Jewish community. And I understand that you're talking about Jesus, the man who lived 2,000 years ago that's portrayed in the New Testament. But at the same time, we can't deny and ignore the fact that Jews have suffered for the last 2,000 years at the hands of the Christians. And that, growing up, I say Jesus, I don't think kosher. The word kosher and Jesus are not two words I would put together as a Jew growing up.
How about sex and kosher?
More than Jesus and kosher.
Really?
Yeah. But, in other words, I find it hard to believe that you really didn't think that the Jewish community...
I'm so sorry. Forgive me. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me.
Yeah.
I'm so partial here, and I just saw one of my servants, my nephew Barak, just walked through the room. Barak, bring me water, please. Thank you. If you see a nephew or a niece, you've got to pounce quick before they move. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So I find it hard to believe that you didn't think that the Jewish community, it's almost like a gut reaction. When you say Jesus, I don't think, the Jew who was, living a Jewish life. That might be true, and I appreciate the fact that you're trying to use that as a bridge, but that doesn't change the fact that in the mind of a Jew, Jesus is not a person who lived. Jesus is an idea that has led to thousands of years of persecution and suffering for the Jewish people. And how does that all of a sudden just go away? How do we forget about that, or how do we forgive that? And they might have forgiven us, but that doesn't mean we are so ready to forgive and to trust that we don't have to face that kind of persecution or threat in the future.
First of all, I can give 20 lectures on just responding to the many questions that you put. A lot of interesting subjects. But let me assure you, I'm way too tired tonight to lie, so I'm not lying. And I'm telling you that I really didn't respect this guy. Of course I didn't respect this guy. No one did. I mean, the people who are sort of knowledgeable of this subject, they're very surprised. They did expect a lot of Christian scholars to maybe react, but not the Jewish community. I had water before, thank you. Someone said this book was Bachal, right? Okay, because you split the question, forgive me for going out of order, which I should have. Thomas is supposed to address things in order. Let me address it in order. Michael Drazen's book, and I vaguely remember reading that when I was like a teenager, if I remember correctly. I'm not. But the thesis, but based on what you conveyed, I think it's very insulting. That's very insulting to Christians. But this book takes Christianity very seriously. It takes Christians very seriously. To say Jesus did not exist and he's nothing, and Christianity is a form of plagiarism is a form of Christian hatred, which no Jew should engage in. That's wrong. And there's ample evidence that Jesus, of course, did exist. And the accounts of his life are just too, they're too vivid for it to be manufactured, in my opinion. So my book differs completely. This book takes Christianity very seriously. It sees Christianity as a phenomenal force for good globally. Today, the Christian church, whether it's Protestants or especially the Catholic Church, operates the world's largest network of orphanages, schools, and hospitals. Christianity is a phenomenal force for good. And you take away 80 million born-again Christians in the United States, and Israel has lost its base of support like that. So when you ask me, how can we forgive the past? Don't forgive what other Christians did to the Jewish community, but that has nothing to do with today's Christians. We don't believe in vertical accountability. The Torah is clear. No son will be punished for the sins of his father. In the same way, I'm not going to blame today's Germans for what Hitler did 70 years ago. We do believe in horizontal accountability. The Germans who were alive at that time, who didn't stop Hitler, even the ones who weren't directly involved, they're culpable. They voted him into office. Hitler was democratically elected. But to say that a German child was born today, Angela Merkel is the best friend Israel has in all of Europe. Now that's not saying a lot these days in Europe, but she is the best friend Israel has in Europe. The Germans are by far, much more stalwart supporters of Israel than the British or the French or the Spanish under Ansar or Osman. I'm sorry, we're good friends, but it depends on their leadership there. Or the Swiss. Now, some would say, whatever the motive is, Jewish guilt over the Holocaust. I don't care what the motive is. I do not hold any German accountable today for the Holocaust, and I do not hold any Christian accountable today for pogroms, auto-da-fés. I'm not going to blame people for the Inquisition. I mean, for goodness sake. We don't believe in vertical accountability, so you don't have to forgive people who did these things to us in previous generations. But how could you hold anyone culpable today who never participated in those atrocities? God forbid. The evangelical Christians that I meet especially are amazing people. But look at Pope Benedict. Like I said, I had the great pleasure of meeting the Pope. I was given 3 days of tours on 2 separate occasions at the Vatican with the utmost respect. And the Pope took my hand in both his hands, and he has a deep affection for the Jewish people. You can see it. And he's visited 3 synagogues already in his pontificate. Now, given that John Paul II went to a synagogue as the first pope in history to do so, I believe in 96 when he went to the shul in Rome. That was the first time in 2,000 years. And this Pope, Benedict, has gone 3 times. And his love of the Jewish people, he's always talking about it. So why should we reciprocate this warmth and friendship? By the way, I think the Catholic Church has to be much better on Israel. They're afraid to take a political stand on Israel. The Catholic Church is a phenomenal friend of Judaism, but not necessarily a phenomenal friend of Israel. The evangelicals are a little bit different. They are the best friends Israel has ever had, but they're not the best friends of Judaism. Many of them still believe that Judaism is not a religion that can take you to heaven. And they think that deep down maybe we should embrace Christianity. I hope this book will change their views.
Shmuley, we're getting near the end here. It's been a fascinating conversation. And I'm not trying to plug the book, but I am telling you that it's worth reading. I had a chance to read it over the last couple of days. And I thank everybody for coming out. And I want to thank again Nessa and all of the staff of the synagogue for hosting us on such absolute short notice, literally maybe 5 days notice. One of the things that you wrote was that Jesus should serve as a hyphen that unites us. Maybe that would be a fitting way that we could end, see if you could comment on that.
Well, first of all, Michael Skoback of Jews for Judaism, and I still haven't responded to his piece on the book because I only read it last night. One of the things that he takes issue with, he says that Shmuley writes that Jesus was a prophet, and now the Jews are going to see him as a prophet. Obviously, there are many people that the word prophet has been greatly expanded in our time. Martin Luther King is called a modern-day prophet. Dare I say, I'm not making any comparison here, but Steve Jobs was seen as a technology prophet. By prophet we mean someone who brought a message to a certain community well ahead of its time. And Jesus brought the message of the Torah to the Jewish people, not to the Christians, not to non-Jews at his time. But after he died, through a very interesting set of circumstances, which I talk about in the book, these messages end up with billions of people worldwide. And I always look at, although this book is not about Paul, it's about Jesus, but Paul figures prominently. What's interesting about Paul? On the one hand, I'm very, very critical of Paul. Paul seems to have been, he claims to have been a Jew. He probably was a convert to Judaism. He says he was a student of Gamaliel. He probably was not. That was not accurate. But and he's anti-Semitic. He writes a lot of nasty things about the Jewish people, and he is a morally ambiguous person. It's very difficult to figure him out. But the one thing that he does is astonishing. And I sort of wonder, what would have happened had the Jewish community thought of doing this at the same time 2,000 years ago? The one thing Paul does is he looks at Judaism and he says, wow, these ideas are like amazing. Why are the Jews keeping it to themselves? The idea of God, the idea of the Ten Commandments, the idea of the Sabbath, all these incredible institutions of the Jews, I bet they can be mainstream. So he starts to mainstream them. The Jerusalem church, who are all Jewish, are very uncomfortable with Paul doing this. They have to reject him, but he brings in all the money from Romans who starts uprooting him, so he's basically funding the community. And through that, he brings these essential Jewish ideas to billions of people. Here we are, 2,000 years later. There's 2 Jews in the world. And there's 1.1 billion Catholics, 700 million Protestants, nearly 2 billion Christians in the world. And how many Jews are there? There were 3. The Mormons have caught up to us already. There are 14 million Mormons in the world, and they started in the 1820s. We started 1,300 years before Christianity. Why didn't we propagate our ideas? Why didn't we mainstream our ideas? I don't mean convert the world to Judaism, because that's an insult to say to someone, if you're not like me, you're going to be damned. Or if you don't believe what I believe, you're not as good as me. I don't believe. But we could have brought our ideas to the world. We could have spread the knowledge of God. Today, even today, this is what I've devoted my life to. I believe that there are essential Jewish ideas relevant to our community that have yet to be. You see, there's 2 kinds of Jewish values. One is the ones that Christianity used. And we've lost copyright on those ideas. So God's name today is Jesus Christ. The Sabbath's name is Sunday. The Ten Commandments, morality. Every person created in the image of God is called democracy. So all these great Jewish ideas go by different names. We don't even get credit for them. But then there are essential Jewish ideas, which I wrote about in my last book, Renewal, 7 essential ideas that Christianity never embraced, that I think, if America were to embrace, would bring great healing to the country. And I don't have time to elaborate on them. And I say to myself, why didn't we do what Paul did? So Paul wanted to convert everyone to Christianity. Okay, take that component away from it. But why didn't we see something so special, precious, and valuable in our tradition that we wanted to share with the world? The Dalai Lama sees something very precious in Buddhism, and he spreads it to the whole Western world without making them into Buddhists. And he's become the most respected spiritual figure alive. Name one Jew or rabbi who even approaches him. Name one rabbi that even approaches Billy Graham. Name one rabbi today that even approaches the Joel Osteens and the Rick Warrens. And that I see as a tragedy, that the Jewish people have so much light to share, and we keep it to ourselves. Here's just one example. Every 4 years, America becomes gay marriage obsessed.
This is where in the book.
Yeah, and 4 years ago, 2008, America's got 2 quarters to rub together. Everyone's house is being foreclosed on. The world economy is collapsing, beginning in the United States, with banks like Lehman and Merrill Lynch going belly up. And how does America respond? We're becoming so materialistic, our houses aren't big enough, our cars are never new enough. We got to do something about it. Let's stop gay marriage in California. If we just stop those gays, America will finally be moral again. We have a values problem in the United States because our Christian brothers and sisters are obsessed with gay marriage and abortion. Now, let's say the Jewish community actually believed that they had something to share with the world. For example, what if we said, you know what? The way to save marriage isn't by attacking gays. The way to save marriage is by dealing with how straight people can't stay in love. You take every gay man and woman in America and ship them to some state and call it Gayistan or whatever you want to call it. Even if you're the most bigoted person on earth, God forbid, and you have a problem with homosexuality, and you separate them, you still have a 50% heterosexual divorce rate. Gays have nothing to do with the breakdown of marriage. We straight people did a fine job destroying marriage ourselves, thank you very much. Now, the Jewish community is one of the only ones that actually talks about divorce. It talks about the beauty of the institution of marriage, or great sex in marriage. Jews are very comfortable with sex in marriage. They don't believe that sex is for privacy. And yet we can never talk about these things because we always talk about abortion and gay marriage. And the Jews who do have these conversations never believe they have anything to say to Christians. Look at the response to my book elicit. Here I am saying the Jews have something to teach Christians. Oh, really? Oh my God, the Christians are coming. You've destroyed Judaism. That's the reaction. That's what the action. And you know what? Even though it's only been a few rabbis, it really has only been a few rabbis, who's opposing them? I've been fighting this battle alone. Where are the rabbis to say, wait a second, why are you assuming that the moment someone writes a book saying that we Jews have something to teach the world, that means that the reverse is going to happen, they're going to come and convert all of us? So that hyphen, Yonah, is all important. Judeo-Christian, with the Judeo coming first. We have something to share with the world. We have no belief in ourselves. We have no pride in ourselves. The Jewish community is just bereft of pride. There's a pride famine in our community. And so the Christians believe they have something to share with the world, and they're out there preaching it, and lecturing about it, and publishing it, and broadcasting it, and we Jews end up speaking to 20 Jews. And it's a tragedy. We keep our light to ourselves, and I don't think it's not a viable model anymore. And by the way, it's not a viable model for Israel. One of the reasons why the world supports Tibet is because they believe that although Tibet is just a country, the whole world benefits from its existence. Do they believe the same thing about the Jewish state? Or is Israel just for Jews? Why doesn't Israel have a lot of friends? Because most people aren't going to sign up for the whole Zionist plan to give the Jews a homeland. What do they care? Do you guys care about the Armenians having a homeland? Do you care about the Kurds having a homeland? Stop saying that the whole world is anti-Semitic against the Jews and they have no special sympathy for Israel. You don't have any special sympathy for Estonia. Why do you expect Americans to give a damn about Israel? Well, the truth is Americans do, because it's a Christian nation. It's these 80 million born-again Christians who are Israel's most stalwart supporters. But if you go to places like Europe who live in the post-Christian era, and Christianity is basically dying or dead in Britain, Russia, France, even Ireland now, Catholic Church is disintegrating. Ireland was the most Catholic country in the world until a decade ago. Couldn't even get divorced. Couldn't have an abortion. You certainly couldn't tell anyone you were gay. Those things are all gone. The Catholic Church is totally, nearly destroyed in Ireland. So now that it's in the post-Christian era, why should they have any special sympathy for Israel? If it's their Christian commitment, so they read the same scripture, they read the same Bible, through Israel you will be blessed. But if they're just secular Europeans, they hear Israel's making trouble. They don't know the intricacies. They don't know it's being attacked day and night by Hamas, Hezbollah. They don't know that Ahmadinejad is serious about his threats to wipe Israel off the map. We have to educate them about that. But we also have to show them that Israel is a country that brings light to the rest of the world, the same way the Dalai Lama brings light to the rest of the world. And even more so, because we've been doing this for a darn long time. And most of the Western world's institutions are based on Judaism, not Buddhism. And this book seeks to connect some of those dots. And yet, it's just being attacked. Let me say in conclusion, first of all, I think it was very courageous and I don't find the right word. It was, you're a leader. It was leadership of you. What's the word? Someone give me a word here. Help me. Forward this. No, something that really, it was commanding of you. Forward to have this done. And I appreciate it. And you've always been a leader, and you're doing great things here in Los Angeles. I wish you all the very best, and God willing to continue the unique impact you're having on Jewish youth, which remain the most elusive constituency in our community. And to all of you who've come out this evening on very short notice, I wrote to Yonah about a week ago, and I said, let's do an event in LA. And I just feel like everyone's attacking this book, and I have no opportunity to speak about it. No matter who comes, because we couldn't even take out an ad in the newspaper, we'll tape it, we'll slap it up on the web, we'll edit it to make us look better. We'll put it up on the web, and people will be able to hear a little bit. So thank you all very much for coming. The book is on sale tonight for the very first time, because I brought 200 copies that I was given. I brought them with my family on a plane. So you're the only people who can actually buy copies, and if you want to, as I said, I have maybe 80 copies in total.